I'm in discovery mode with the topic that we're going to be sharing with you today. And I always have a little bit of a tear as well when we have these sessions about whether we make it interactive or not. I know that a lot of people come and they've got other things happening at the same time, and they might not necessarily be in the right space to enjoy a breakout room. If that opportunity arises and there's enough people that are engaged and they're sort of their cameras are on and they're here, I'd love to give you a chance to explore some of the pieces that I'm going to introduce today. Like I said, it really is discovery mode. And a lot of what I'm going to be sharing with you today are insights that have been developed through not just my research in applied and organizational psychology, but from my work in coaching and coach training, but also from the hours of listening to my clients speak to me about their progress and their learning. And I've just started to notice some themes that seem to be coming together. I'm also very aware that there could be a lot of confirmation bias on the go whilst I'm sharing these pieces. So you've always got to be a bit aware of that. But I feel like we've stumbled across a lovely little bit of a golden nugget that has got application in lots of different areas. So the subject of the session is called "It's Not About You," which is a little bit of an abrupt statement, so forgive me for that. And it all started with an experience that I had about a year ago. I was invited to speak at a conference, and I speak at quite a few conferences. I do about 5 or 6 public speaking events a year. And by that, I mean a large event at a conference. I'm obviously speaking all day, every day when I'm doing corporate training. But so I'm pretty comfortable and I'm pretty confident speaking in front of large groups. And I'm doing it regularly. And that's the reason why what happened to me on this particular occasion about a year ago really took me by surprise. So I turned up at this particular event. There was about 300 people in the audience, and there was quite a few speakers that had been invited to talk at this particular conference. It was based in Dubai. It was at a fancy hotel, and by any stretch, it was a fairly intimidating arena. It was a plush 5-star hotel, lots of people, cabaret tables. There was quite a few speakers that were well known, and Pete Turner managed to get himself on the list to do a 45-minute talk. But do you know what? I'm pretty comfortable in those situations. I'm doing it all the time. I was really confident and I was absolutely fine with it. But something happened to me that destroyed my confidence for about 3 or 4 minutes at the beginning of my talk. So we're sat there, and I knew that I was going to be next up on stage to speak in about 10 minutes' time as the speaker in front of me was getting to the end of their presentation. And they happened to have this MC at the event who was very, very charismatic. She was an American lady. She had loads and loads of gravity, loads and loads of energy. And after the speaker in front of me finished their presentation, this MC lady got up onto the stage, grabbed hold of the microphone, thanked the previous speaker, and then proceeded to introduce Pete Turner. And fairly normal situation. It happens quite a lot. But this particular speaker gave me an introduction that lasted for about 5 minutes. She went through my entire resume. She could have been a Hollywood actress. She really, really hammed it up. And I noticed that throughout her introduction of me that was going on forever and ever and ever, I suddenly started to experience loads and loads of nerves that I hadn't experienced in years of speaking to people on stage. And it really, really took me by surprise. And by the time her 5-minute introduction had finished and I got up onto stage to speak, all of those horrible somatic responses that get you when you're nervous happened to me. My mouth went dry, my palms went sweaty. I suddenly couldn't think of any words to say. My tongue felt like it was 3 times the normal size, and I was mumbling over my words. It really, really destroyed me in that opening couple of moments when I was on stage. Anyway, it really took me by surprise. After a couple of minutes, I settled into the presentation and then everything was fine. But After the day had finished and I was reflecting and I was trying to understand what happened, I was really trying to piece together what had gone on in that moment for me. And it got me thinking about a particular topic and concept that I've been actually exploring for a long time through my coach training. And there's a few people on this program that will have heard about this particular topic. But it got me thinking a lot in general about also the work that I do with a lot of my clients. And a lot of my clients come to me to say, Pete, I want to work on my negotiation skills, my public speaking skills. I want to have more influence. I want to know how to present to the board with more gravity. I want to be a better salesperson. I want to feel like I've got more confidence and presence or executive presence, or maybe how to have that courageous conversation. So these are the topics that I spend a lot of my time working with my clients around. But that experience that I had up on stage really got me thinking and unpacking what can go wrong and obviously what can go well when you're in those situations. So it got me exploring, it sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole of exploring different types of selves. Actually, let me just go back up for a moment. The concept that I landed on was this idea of self-orientation. And I talk a lot about self-orientation on our coach training program. And it has so many, it crops up in so many different areas of our lives, particularly in those areas. So self-orientation was the topic. But in my journey of trying to understand self-orientation, it sent me off on down this rabbit hole of trying to understand lots of different types of self. So what's the difference between self-orientation and self-confidence and self-belief and self-esteem and self-efficacy? What's the difference between all of those pieces? So just a little bit of an overview and some of my exploration of these pieces. So what is self-confidence? The Latin derivative of self-confidence actually means with faith or with the belief in your ability, okay? And typically what we mean by that, although it can have another meaning, is your situational ability. I have faith in my situational ability. Self-consciousness means, there's the word with, and the second part of self-consciousness actually means knowledge. It's knowledge about yourself or an awareness of yourself. Okay, and that will crop up again when we talk about self-orientation. Self-esteem is another interesting version. Esteem actually means value or judgment or worth. Okay, so it is some sort of a judgment of your inherent value as a human being, and it's not situational or domain specific. Okay, so you can win or lose. And if you've got a strong sense of your own inherent value, then your self-esteem is going to be okay. But that's different in interesting ways to self-efficacy. Efficacy actually means effectiveness. So that's very much about your ability in a specific situation, your effectiveness in a specific situation. So people with strong self-efficacy, so I'm looking at Max, who trained me for a fairly extended period of time, who is a genuine expert in his domain. He has got unbelievable levels of self-efficacy when it comes down to diet, nutrition, training, and physical transformations. So self-efficacy is your effectiveness in a specific domain. Self-orientation, orientation is a word that basically means how things are arranged or what things are, where it is pointing, okay? And if it's the self, it's where things are arranged around yourself or the focus is on you. And in my exploration, it's this area that has got the ability to really obliterate our feelings of self-confidence in any particular moment. And that's what happened to me when I was up on stage. Because when I was about to deliver my presentation, which was all about strengths-based leadership and coaching-based servant leadership, that's really what I was there to speak about. But in that moment of the presentation, the MC made it all about me. And suddenly the spotlight was on me in a massive way. And that self-orientation created a lot of self-consciousness, which then destroyed my ability to be fully present in that moment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how self-orientation can creep up on us in different domains. But before I do that, it's really important to separate the difference between self-orientation and selfishness. And selfishness is more of an approach where my self-centeredness is going to take something away from another person. That's really the definition of selfishness. My selfishness is going to, in some way, cause a diminishment or disadvantage or harm towards another person. Self-orientation is not about that. So there's a real distinction between self-orientation and selfish. Self-orientation is not being selfish, but it's a subtle spotlight that is shining on you that can destroy your ability to be fully present. Now, for those people that have been on the coach training program, you'll be really familiar with the next two slides that I'm going to show you. Here are some subtle clues to self-orientation. So when we think about how we listen to other people, how we maybe give advice to other people, whether we have feelings of low confidence or our response to people of high status, which is very similar to how we might react and respond to large numbers of people. All of those situations can give us clues as to whether we are self-orientating or not. So again, for those people that have done the coach training program, they will remember this slide. And if you haven't, what we talk about is how the way that you listen to other people might give you a clue to whether you are listening at the level of you, which is a version of self-orientation, or whether you're listening at the level of other people, okay? Are you others focused? And I would hazard a little bit of a guess that most people are listening at the level of me, okay? And you know that that's happening in the dialogue when you hear people use language like, oh, me too, or oh, I've had the same situation. Oh, I also went there on holiday. If you're listening at the level of me, typically you're listening for relatability, things that you can relate to personally because it's about you, or you're listening for agreement and disagreement. And those two pieces are clues that you're listening at the level of you. And that is self-orientation. And it can diminish trust and connection with other people. And actually, it can mean that you're really missing the real meat of a conversation and the ability to have a greater impact on the person that you're engaging with. When we're listening at the level of others and we're resisting the urge to listen for relatability and agreement and disagreement, you can pay attention to what's really important about them. You can actually hear values. You can hear assumptions. You can hear their beliefs. You can hear deeper insight, limiting beliefs maybe. And when you listen at that level, you can bring amazing gravity to the room. As I said, most people are listening at the level of relatability. Oh, I've also been there. Okay, the conversation flipper, and it flips back to me. And we're missing out on so much opportunity to land with more gravity, have greater impact, and a deeper connection with other people. Again, there's another one for those people that have been on the coach training program. Typically, by the way, giving advice, not always a bad thing. I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room that are paid pretty handsomely for their ability to give good advice. But sometimes our advice giving need can be a clue to your self-orientation. And Michael Bungay-Stayner, and I'll do this very quickly because I know that there'll be a lot of people that are familiar with this slide. Michael Bungay-Stayner has a wonderful TED talk called How to Tame Your Advice Monster. And he talks about 3 different ways that your need to self-orientate can diminish a conversation. And he talks about those 3 needs of self-orientation. So some people love to be the expert in the room. So the moment they've heard a little bit of dialogue from the other person, they'll immediately go into advice giving mode. And actually, rather than really helping that other person, Actually, what they're really doing is satisfying their own need to look like the expert in the room. Some people do it because they're trying to satisfy their own need to be in control of a situation. So that's your micromanager leader who wants to be in control of everything. Actually, it's not about the other person at all. It's really them just satisfying their own need, that self-orientation of needing to be in control. And then we've all heard of this one, the rescuer, where we feel uncomfortable when other people are in discomfort. And again, it's another version of self-orientation. It's our need to rescue people and our need to avoid our discomfort of seeing the other person in discomfort. So if you find yourself in conversation, trying to solve everybody's problems, trying to control everything around you, trying to rescue people by not letting them feel discomfort, actually in that moment, it could just be about you and not about them. And obviously we talk about that in the coaching world, because when we're pure coaching, we're not giving any advice. We're just getting out of the way and letting other people manage their own situations, because as we always say in coaching, it's not about you. So here is another piece that absolutely blew me away. And what I'm about to show you now is an amalgamation of loads of different coaching sessions that I've had with people. And I noticed this powerful dichotomy between two different pieces. I've noticed that some of my clients, when they're in the company of high status people, which I put in inverted commas because there's a subjectivity about that word. When they're in the company of high status people, they can either be inspired by those people, which produces all of this incredible positive emotion, or they can be intimidated by those people. And it's something that has absolutely hit me like a sledgehammer with the clients that I'm working with, who are spending a lot of their time going to community or networking events, or trying to develop influence, or maybe they're trying to make a sale and they're in the company of people that they perceive to have high status, or they crumble when they're in the company of their CEO because they're just so overwhelmed by that person. But I've really noticed this difference between those people who are inspired by people with high status versus those people who are intimidated by people of high status. And here's my potential piece of confirmation bias. The difference, and by the way, of course, there could be many, many factors here, and there almost always are. We can't always boil it down to one. But I've noticed this amazing difference between those people that are inspired by other people are others-oriented. And those people that are intimidated by people of high status in that moment are self-orientating. So when we're inspired, and forgive me for the tininess of the writing, they see that person of high status as a light bulb. And the bigger their status, the brighter light they shine. But those people who are intimidated by people with high status, they see those people like a mirror. And that mirror reflects our own inadequacies. And the bigger their status, the bigger the reflection of our own inadequacies. When we're others-orientated, we're focused on what other people know. When we're self-orientated, we're focused on how little we know. When we're others-orientated, we try harder to understand others. When we're self-orientated, we just try to prove ourselves in the company of those people. When we're others-orientated, we ask questions and follow-up questions. When we're self-orientated, we sink away and ask few questions. When we're others-orientated, we're excited. When we're self-orientated, we're anxious. When we're others-orientated, we're humble. When we're self-orientated, we might be submissive or self-depreciating. Positive emotion for others, negative emotion for self-orientated. When we're others-orientated, we're present. And when we're self-orientated, we're distracted and hijacked by our own thinking. When we're others-orientated and inspired, we listen for insight. We're relaxed. We're egoless. When we're self-orientated and intimidated, we listen for comparison. We're tight and we become self-conscious. And I really have spent a lot of time, obviously it's my own pulling together of different pieces. And by the way, this isn't just two separate people. I'm sure it's the same person. And sometimes there's a little bit of both going on at the same time. But I've been really, really struck by those people who could be in the company of those with high status, and it just inspires them and energizes them, versus those other occasions where we become diminished in that moment. And what I call it is the mirror effect. Self-orientation is like a mirror, and it shines a light on us, exposing us. And the bigger the status, or maybe the more people in the room that you're speaking to, the mirror becomes bigger and the reflection on us becomes stronger, and the more self-conscious we become. So here's a couple of those domains that we spoke about. I love the word executive presence. I did a program on it. I went on a course around executive presence, and they have this beautiful definition, which is a bit of an oxymoron, really. They say executive presence is impossible to define, but you know it when you see it. And it's that elusive, subjective quality that some people just seem to have, but we can't really put our finger on what it is that they've got. But I would argue, using this framework, that self-orientation invites self-consciousness, the mirror effect. And self-consciousness is the enemy of presence. And any performer in any domain, if they're going to be at their best, needs to be fully present in that moment and not hijacked by the thinking that throws up in their mind about themselves. Self-consciousness is the destroyer of presence. And presence will destroy our gravity. A lack of presence will destroy our gravity in that moment. In fact, to be fully present, there are two components of presence. One is being in the moment. So you're not in the future and you're not in the past. So in the present moment. And then the other part of presence is a dropping of the ego. There's no ego when we're fully present. And then that connects very closely to flow states, which I know that a lot of people in here will be aware of. You can't be in flow if you're thinking about yourself. So less self-orientation equals more presence equals more gravity. And one of the things that I've noticed, some of the advice that I've heard other people have been playing with, is when they're going to an event or a performance, public speaking, for example, they might try to use affirmations to try and get them to that state where they're going to be feeling more confident. But the danger with affirmations that are self-focused is it just invites more self-orientation, and then it creates more of a mirror effect, and then it creates more and then it diminishes your presence. So saying things like, I'm going to be great, I'll be inspirational, they're going to love me, I'm going to be fantastic. Actually, the operative word in all of those sentences is me. And all of that self-orientation can, well, like it did to me on that stage that time, obliterate your ability to be fully present. So if you're telling yourself you're going to have to be great, you're focusing in the wrong direction. Actually, your focus really should be on the audience. It should be on the content and the message and the people that are in front of you, not on you, because of course it's not about you. Courageous conversations is another domain that I work a lot with my clients, and there's a beautiful flip that enables the leader or the person that's got to go into that courageous conversation that they can make that will enable them to be more composed in that space. So when we are self-orientated, we get afraid of that courageous conversation because of how we are going to feel in that moment. Olivia, if you can just, it actually might be coming from me, I hope not, but if you can just mute anybody.
Yeah, we did.
Please, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So when we're self-orientated, we're typically worried about how we are going to feel when you have that courageous conversation. They might explode in front of you. They might react in a way that we might not be prepared for. Okay, so it's our self-orientation that can diminish our ability to be composed in that moment. But if we flip it and we become others orientated and we start to ask questions like, I wonder what their response explains about them. So if they respond in a really combustible way, I wonder what that says about that person. Okay, so just flipping the focus onto the other person's response can relax us in that moment and bring us to that place of being more present. Negotiation is another one. And I don't know whether you've heard of these words before, but it's a really simple tool to think about how you can be a stronger negotiator. And I love these two phrases of steel manning and straw manning in a negotiation. I don't know whether you've heard of these before. Forgive me if you've heard of these and I'm telling you something that you already know. But for those of you who haven't, it's a really lovely negotiation tactic that you can use in those moments. And if you really want to be stronger in a negotiation, steel manning is a much more effective way of having more of an impact in a negotiation. But most people spend their time straw manning in a negotiation. And straw manning is where you focus on the weakest version of the other person's argument. Steel manning is where you focus on the strongest version of another person's argument. And it reminded me of that famous Stephen Covey quote from Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. Seek first to understand and then to be understood. And when you steel man in a negotiation, you actually spend most of your time deeply trying to understand the strongest version of the other person's argument, and then telling that person the strongest version of their argument, even better than they could say it themselves. It is an incredible negotiation strategy. Unfortunately, when we're self-orientated, we're not really paying attention to their argument. We are just thinking about our own argument. We are trying to get them to understand us before we try to understand them, if we try to understand them at all. So I love that connection between steel manning and others orientation versus straw manning and self-orientation. So it's a lovely negotiation tactic. Next time you're in a negotiation, listen to what the other person says as deeply as possible, and then tell that person their own argument better than they told it to you themselves. You will be amazed at how it decreases their resistance. Because one of the errors we make when it comes to negotiation or trying to influence people is we try to increase our persuasion, which again is all about us. Whereas when we focus on just decreasing their resistance, you can pay much more attention to what they want in the negotiation. And when people feel that you're making it about them, the levels of resistance can drop down. And there's our Stephen Covey piece: seek first to understand and then to be understood. Okay, and then we use this all the time. So again, a lot of people will have seen it, but it just keeps cropping up for me in the work that I do with people, where this self-orientation piece can obliterate our ability to make connection and build trust. I was actually pitching for some work a couple of days ago, and the HR director was saying, Pete, we want our people to be more influential. We want our leaders to have more influence. And I couldn't help thinking that there's something about that word that just doesn't feel right, to have more influence. There's something about the word influence that tinges with the idea of manipulating another person, controlling another person to get them to do what you want them to do. Actually, rather than trying to have more influence, what about just trying to build deeper trust? Because when people trust you, they'll come with you. But here's our trust equation. Self-orientation is the destroyer of trust. And by the way, self-orientation, remember what I said at the beginning, it's not selfishness, although selfishness would come under it. Self-orientation doesn't have to be the ego in the room. It can be listening at the level of me. It can be our advice monster taking control of the situation. It can be gradually trying to be more persuasive rather than just seeking first to understand. So how do we resist that urge to get rid of that mirror, and rather than shining it on ourselves, flip it so that it's pointing at other people? Now we get to the really difficult bit. And this is the part in my sessions where I have really been challenged with my clients, because almost all of this content that I've shared with you, when I go through it with when I work on it with my clients, they all love the knowledge. They're like, yeah, Pete, I love it. I love it. Yeah, totally get it, on board. And even though I know it, I still can't do it. Like, there's a gap. There's that elusive gap between what we know and how we behave. And that is unfortunately where I dry up and I throw the ball over at you and I say, how do you do it? How do you do it? Going back to my story at the beginning, and I spoke about this idea of just focus on the content, focus on the people, focus on the message, focus on the value proposition. But that introduction from that lady just completely floored me in that moment. So yeah, nice idea, Pete, but how do you do it? One way of thinking about this is the difference between training versus just gathering new knowledge. So today's about a knowledge transfer. I've just told you a bunch of stuff. Some of it you might know, some of it you might not, some of it you might agree with, some of it you might not. And that's fine. But even if you did agree with it and you bought in intellectually, it doesn't necessarily mean that we've got some application there. So how can we train ourselves to be more orientated towards other people? And there's a few suggestions that we've got around that. One of them is to behave like a coach. To ask lots of questions, to listen more deeply, to stay curious a little bit longer, to resist the urge to flip the conversation onto yourself and to say, me too. The other one, and this is an idea that I've been playing with a lot over the last 10 to 12 months, is this idea of mindfulness meditation, because those two components of getting present in the now and also dropping the ego, the self, I found to be really, really powerful for me. So when you're playing that game of mindfulness meditation, the thoughts which are going to constantly be coming into your mind is just resisting the urge to be attached to those thoughts. You can't control the thoughts. They're always going to be coming in and out of your head. But can you just resist the urge to be hijacked by those thoughts? So an example of that in action would be you're sat there listening to somebody. They've just told you that they've been on holiday to this beautiful island in the Maldives, and you went to that exact same island the month before. Have you got the strength and your brain is just saying, I want to tell you that I went there last month as well, but have you got the presence to just go, do you know what? This is their moment. Tell me a little bit more about your holiday, rather than flipping it onto you immediately. Obviously, we might be missing out on some opportunity to share an experience, so I get that. But just a little bit of practice in that moment to just keep it about them a little bit longer. Of course, the other piece that I didn't really necessarily talk about was around sales. And we know that in any sales conversation, if the person you're selling to, in inverted commas, gets a sniff that this is all about you getting value, not about them, then they're going to run a mile from you anyway. So we know that in a sales environment, anything that feels like it's all about you is going to drop into that self-orientation box and potentially obliterate your ability to land with real credibility and trust. So there's my piece. And I'm really interested in your thoughts. Now, we've got quite a few people with their cameras off. So, and Paddy's got a question. Fantastic. I didn't notice that because I couldn't see very many people on my screen. I'm really interested to see what anybody's got to share or challenge about what we've just said. So I might throw the ball to Paddy. I can't see Paddy on the screen yet, but if you're still there, I might throw the ball.
Yeah.
Yeah, Paddy, what are you thinking at the moment?
Can you see me? You should be able to see me. I can see myself.
No, it's a black screen for some reason.
Oh dear.
That's okay.
But we can hear you.
We can hear you. Yeah, over to you, Paddy. Love to get your thoughts.
Anyway, I'm here. Well, no, it's just really fascinating, Pete. That was really, really interesting, and it really does gel with quite a lot of my experience in over my career as a barrister. And the thing that I wanted to jump in and say was just a small story, which I always found very useful, even from university days and into my early career and still today. It was something my English teacher back in school said to me. I had written this essay, and it was an English essay which I dashed off in the morning of the morning. I remember I hadn't done it, and I wrote it really, really fast. So it must have been a bit of a stream of consciousness type essay. Much to my surprise, the next week she asked me to read the essay out to all the students in the class. And so I started reading it out, and she stopped me after a few minutes, and she said, look, she said, we're not interested in your personality. Stop being goofy, just read it. And I said, I actually thought that was a brilliant lesson, and it actually applies to giving presentations. It applies to any type of professional presentation, really, in court as well. And then, of course, inevitably, your own foibles and your character come out, and as hopefully you are more at ease as your skills develop and everything, in terms of persuasion and negotiation and everything. You can't be somebody other than yourself. But I think it's a very helpful little trick, to say, look, it's about the message. It's about whatever it is that is the subject of the discussion. And I think the other thing that is really helpful in terms of confidence is that everybody, even including the more experienced people, for example, judges or senior lawyers or very experienced senior executive clients, everybody is, only doing their best. And there is no perfect. And I think that is something you mentioned, training and meditation. I think to a certain extent, experience comes in as well. I think confidence comes with experience, and you do. I know that you can, and that's an example of something that people can know that, but to actually internalize that and then begin to sort of relax a bit in stressful situations, and know that, and sort of say, well, look, we can let that through to the keeper. Don't need to respond to everything here. You may feel like at moments when somebody puts you on the spot, including in very stressful situations in a litigation context, in open court, that the ground, is going to swallow you up, because suddenly you feel like you're completely exposed. But sometimes these little reminders are very useful in that context. You may actually just not have the answer. You may not have what the other person is looking for. But again, a dialogue. And I loved what you were saying about not being about yourself, and about spending more time trying to understand the other side. Because certainly in my game, that's the objective. The objective is to have a dialogue which persuades, and that includes the court. So maybe you don't have the answer, but if you're focused on what the other person is exploring, then that gives you the room and to explore that, and that then creates a more open space where confidence can be restored.
Yeah, rather than in that moment trying to prove that you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thanks for that. You made me want to say something else, but it's not about me. So I'm going to throw it over to Sandy. I've had enough of the microphone, so I'm going to resist the urge and throw the ball to Sandy.
Thanks, Pete. Hey, strikes me that this is in some way, I guess, tied a little bit to Mark Colbrane's presentation and the session that he did with us around the chimp and everything coming through the emotional brain first, where that's kind of where our confidence takes us. And I wonder then how we could apply some of those principles from the chimp paradox to move us through that emotional receptor and then into the rational human center that says, interesting, I'm feeling it about myself, but it's not about me. How do I now switch and move it back? So it's kind of a nice kind of segue from Mark's session, just an observation.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Just that little, well, it's mindfulness in the moment, isn't it? Just a little dialogue with yourself.
Yeah.
I'll just share a really vulnerable story with you, which I've told thousands of times on the APC. It was a few years ago. Michaela, you and I were going through coach training, I think probably at the same time. And I had a coaching session with this particular person, very high status, 15 years older than me, running a business, millionaire, all that sort of stuff. And we got to the end of the hour and he looked at me and he said, Peter, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I got absolutely nothing out of that hour with you. And I can remember it was like a dagger to the heart. I mean, it just obliterated me in that moment. And it was just around the sort of time where I was starting to really get the feel for this coaching thing and remember that it isn't about me. And I looked him in the eye and I said, thanks for that feedback. What do you think you could have done differently to have got more out of that hour? And it was really me talking to myself in that moment. But I was really trying to, just land with that idea that, you know what, it's not about me. And if you want this to be successful, then it'll be because of the work that you put into it. Now, of course, there's a paradox there because I could have also been useless as a coach. And so it's not, it was a partnership between the two of us. But Phil Farrow, it's been a long time since I've seen you, and I'm looking straight into your eyes, and I'm going to be really unfair and just put you on the spot for a moment and just see you and just, how are you doing and what's resonating and bobbing up in your mind after all these years?
Yeah, it's great to be on the call firstly, and thank you for the content. It's really resonated, I think it's fair to say. So it's really good. I think hearing you talk and seeing what the examples are that you were giving makes me think that there's various, I see myself on a continuum of self-orientated, others orientated, and different situations, different scenarios, actually needing to shift along, not always to others orientated, but possibly to self-orientated as well, to get the best out of a conversation or a meeting in order to build potentially the credibility, the intimacy, to be able to share the same stories. I 100% take on board the example you gave about not sharing the story about the Maldives, even though you may have been there yourself, and kind of zipping your mouth up and not saying anything. But at the same time, that helps to build a level of credibility, of trust, or not just the Maldives, but in business, to show that you know what the other person is talking about and that you've experienced it yourself, then ultimately creates that trust potentially. So I can actually see there's different scenarios, different needs of really, and in my mind, I was just thinking of a continuum and just sliding up and down depending on the scenario, but actually then also having the self-awareness to know when to slide up and down, when to keep stum and not say anything, because you want to listen to the other person, dig a bit deeper about their experiences and not just overshare about me, but then also to get the balance right. I think that's probably what I'm taking away at this stage. I really want to go and practice. I know I'm going to be meeting new teams over the coming months and new people that I haven't met before. So there's going to be a lot of introductions, lots of getting to know people I've never met before. So I'm really excited to start to think about this and how I will actually be more aware of others and have that other the orientation to others, rather than just about showing who I am and what I'm going to bring to things. So it's really interesting, and I'm quite excited to see how I'm going to be more present to putting myself up when I start to want to talk about my holiday to the Maldives or Sri Lanka, wherever it may be, but actually not sharing that and just smiling and asking more to learn more from the other person.
Yeah, thank you so much. And if you don't mind, I'm just gonna layer on top of what you just said, Phil, because I think I've done a piece of work recently around paradoxes and that ability to hold two seemingly different ideas in your head at the same time, and just sort of connecting around what you just said there. There's a balance, and a subtle balance, between demonstrating your credibility but versus making it all about yourself. So I'm imagining myself again with Max or with Fads down at Embody Fitness. These guys are incredible at what they do. I think they're the best in the UAE when it comes to physical transformations. And so when Max is selling his services to me, there's a fine balance between him telling me about him and demonstrating his credibility, but then at the same time not making it about him. And that could be the same in that leadership piece that you were just describing there, Philip, around introducing who you are and the business and your values and your leadership, and a little bit of maybe vulnerability about yourself so they can build connection, but then at the same time not making it about you. And I think that that's a really interesting balance that some people are able to strike in a really powerful way. So I sometimes see that credibility and self-orientation balancing act as a really curious and interesting challenge. Max, I've blown your trumpet a lot today, so I'm going to stop doing that, because it's not about you, man. I'm going to throw the ball around to a couple more people, and then we'll close it. So if you've got your camera on, get ready for the ball to be thrown at you. Dan, I really enjoyed our work together on the APC. Danny Brown. So I'm just love to just know what's resonating for you off the back of everything that's just been shared so far. So just an open reflection, mate.
Yeah, thanks heaps, Pete. And one of the big things that I really feel I need to lean into on this is that there's been some massive transformational periods in my life where, without realizing it, I've moved from self-orientation to others orientation, but without understanding it in the way that you've described it. Yet where the sort of paradox comes for me, a little bit like Phil, is that there are still many parts of my life where I'm very heavily self-orientated and feel all of the anxiety and emotion that comes with that. And I'm uncomfortable in that situation. Yet there are other parts of my life and my work world where I'm heavily others orientated. And so there's this paradox about what keeps pulling me back to this self-orientation, and just been thinking it through around things like not being prepared enough to give the presentation, even though perhaps similar to you, the things that I've done quite often before, being in that presence of high status individuals, feeling that self-orientation and that nervousness and that insecurity. And so there's a really interesting piece for me around what drags me back toward the self-orientation rather than allow me to flourish in that others orientation, and similar to that knowledge and understanding piece.
Yeah.
I know what I need to do, but I don't do it.
Yes.
So there's a massive amount of stuff I need to lean into with this at the moment. It's really just blown my mind, actually. So I'll need to go and decamp somewhere for a bit and work through it all.
Yeah. If you figure out the behavior bit, give us a call, because I haven't got that far yet. David, thanks, Dan. David, over to you, mate. You got your...
What really came home for me was resistance vice persuasion in negotiation. Brilliant point, Peter. I absolutely love it, and that's going to change my life. Thank you. But the second one was this paradox piece. And I'm going to, you've talked about paradoxes before. Patrick, is there a proper word for paradoxes? Is it paradoxi or something? Patrick will know. Anyway, if Paddy will give us that in due course. But this credibility versus self-orientation that you find difficult. actually, if I look at your story, I think if you can, that excellent introduction by the superhuman, energetic actress from Hollywood piece was actually your opportunity to get rid of that paradox, because your credibility was established by somebody else. And that might be what I learned from this, that if you're having to establish your own credibility, you're in a bad place. If you can get somebody else to establish your credibility, then you can concentrate on self-orientation and not do any of that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Michaela, I was going to throw the ball over to you. I know that you're in this world a lot. You're an executive coach and probably having these conversations with lots of your clients. And anything resonating for you?
Yeah, a lot resonated with me. Thank you so much for sharing all these insights. It was a great learning. Yeah, being present and being understood that is not about myself was a big struggle for me, at least at the beginning of when I started doing coaching. And how should I say, over the time I become better to this. I still have a lot to go and to learn, but for me, one point that really helped me very much after I've done the Gallup certification, and I really understood that that's top 5, one in more than 33 million. This really helped me, and every time when I kind of am in the coaching process, I just realize, well, your client is different than you, so just be there and support him or her. And another piece that really resonated with me from your presentation, it's when you said that focus on what their response say about them in a conversation and their reactions. And this reminds me a lot about what Marcus Buckingham had in a presentation and talk about feedback. That when we give feedback, it's actually how we feel in the presence of the other person, and that feedback belongs to me. And when we receive feedback, it's how we make the person feeling. So it's nothing, to do with us. It's just how the other person feels. And for us, it's critical to understand what actually bothered them in our behavior, and then to find the commonality and the common language and the common ground to do the things differently next time. I mean, really, I kind of make this analogy between what you said, and it comes to me. And for me, when I discovered this approach, it really helps me at a personal level, because all the time I was feeling guilty for making people feel in a certain way, the way they were saying they're feeling. But then I try to understand where this came from, and sometimes it was just different understanding of things, the fact that we are unique. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not sure how this sounds, but yeah, thank you very much. Anyhow, it was great being here. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, everybody. I was about to say goodbye, but very, very quickly, it's unbelievable that the guy's got 30 seconds in his schedule. But Michael Todd has just dialed in. He's probably 35,000 feet in the air. Who knows? But Mick, great to see you. Just a couple of words, and then I'm going to say thanks very much to everybody for dialing in. It was so great to see so many people here today. I really, really enjoyed sharing that content with you, and I hope it's been of value. But Mick, just a couple of pieces. I know you want to say hi to everybody.
Oh, no, I just wanted to pop in and say hi, Pete. I'm in Bangkok today working with a great team, and I think I just caught the tail end of what was being spoken about. I think the big insight for me around the idea of focusing on the impact of what you do, not the information you want to share, is such a transformational piece that I did in London last week, that I'm doing this week in Thailand. Is so many of us get into the space where we think we're driving a dump truck and we go, back up, beep, beep, beep. I'm going to dump this information on you, rather than think about impact and how do we create connection and impact rather than share information. So I think that is such a powerful piece. I'll leave you with that. Pete, congratulations on having so many champions in the room. It's great to see people like Big Nige. I don't know where Big Nige is, somewhere just drinking a cup of coffee somewhere. So many great people. Brownie, I'm seeing him joining from Brisbane after sending me a rather disturbing message earlier in the day. Brownie, great to see you there to create impact, mate. Disturbing in a funny way, not in a terrible way. So fantastic to see people creating connection all over the world. So well done, and great to see Sandy in Sydney. Where it's fantastic that we've got so many people from all over the world creating connection and creating impact. So well done. I better go and do some work here, but great to see you.
So great to see you, everybody. Give us a big smile. Make yourselves look as pretty as you can. And until the next time, so great to see you. Thank you so much for joining. Until the next time, love you all. Thanks, everybody.